Greetings of solidarity from the IPMSDL Global Secretariat. Welcome to our IP Heroes, Stories of Struggle for Land and Life, a film showing series that tells the life of our indigenous heroes around the world. This is part of our November 10 IP Heroes Day celebration, a celebration of the legacy of indigenous peoples, First Nations, tribal, aboriginal, and native heroes, martyrs, departed, and living indigenous leaders, individuals, and communities. We hope you can join us on November 10 to live our IP Hero struggle for land, life, rights, and territories. Today is the first film showing series for the IP Heroes Day. We are sharing these two films, 𝐴𝐿 Defender of Indigenous Karen Territories, The Environment and Way of Life, and Greed, Betrayal, and the Battle for Nigeria's Oil Money, the Ken Saro-Wiwa story. We thank the Karen Environmental and Social Action Network, or 𝐿𝐶AN, and News Africa. Without them, we will not see these beautiful films about 𝐴𝐿 and Ken Saro-Wiwa, the Karen peoples and indigenous Ogoni struggle for self-determination. I hope you enjoy these films and inspire you to stand with the world's indigenous communities and live the legacy of our indigenous heroes.
ဖဲပြတဲ့ဟထဒူလမပလဖဲတူထခွေရခွေစင်းမီနီဆကတနီစောမူဒဟီပိုကဖတိတဖာဟာထလက်ခေပုပလက်တလပဝမ်သောထောပူနီလောဖဲကီထသနီလိုင်နူအရတစီယသနီအဝဲဖလောသာဒနောဖောသာဒေါ်ထဖိုခဲလအဝဲနီကနီလောให้โทรเลยป่ะอ๋อพูดมาแล้วMacam mana cara? Macam mana? Nah, le bau tapi nak karinya.
Wah, kebetulan nak kasih kebetulan nak ya.
Lagi lagi dah apa saja?
Kalau kebetulan sih, cuma sekolah kerja. Kamu ni salah.
Pada boleh badut tiada.
Belum ah.
Aku nak kiri dan belakang aku macam apa? Bawa palu pun palu papiol le tari akadu tu ni mera capu kapu lo. Kapu le bawa pakainya, dah capu kapu ni mera tahu mu, tabati di tu, belum bati lulu ni tahu mu dah capu kapu tahu mu ni terlalu cakap apa? Bawa dah bersuci pinya lo. Awak tiada tahu dah curah lo kali mera kukup kapu, kutup kadu, kutup kadu lo. Bawa pakainya ni bawa mu le, cikup lo buta lo lo hulap lo, no. Aku ni awak tiada tahu mu. Aku awe akhir kau ni data tu dua puluh di lo. Siapa apa le ta tro le tu yu pun mereka thoko ta do ta bon boto kli toki bo ta tirpanya bertanya le awe am kuliglo cali. Naga ni le patu lipo ago ni tu yu patu thoko ni awe permati ba. Aku ni ta so lu si kau le do tu le buko. Mana ni tu yu pun ni mewa siapa apa kat do le buko. Awe petet thobu apa phobu ni siapa tu. Le tu kau nyai ta lo lui to ni pe do ti ba du ti pemu phot ko pho le ta lo ga le pete pra pu ata o no ta tu ta o lo mo le ma pre che pu pha pu ta lo ti si ki le pa phe pa pra wo khap
sa thola sa hi so ko wi ala kilili so mu klasa hu ge hi lo fa lo pa to ta phita ma do ta gu thop so thola ta ku ba ku te le la thu tu nu do ta seta la do ta do the do re te ka to ki thuli ni sa ta o ya do sa pho ko phu mi la tir pha ni lo
ดิฉันโมเลข้าชูญาปปาตัวอีดีอัตรากุรบต่อถอดีโดมีเลยดิฉันโมกุรบต่อถอดเตี้ยๆวะบางมื้อคนเลยครอบลูกแค่เลยตาเต็ดก็ตาปลิตาข้าเช่าถอดีที่มีตาก็ตากเลยดีว่าคนนี้นะคนนี้มีอะไรปกบาบัวกี่ถอดีปกีบิโซเลยตาเลยปเปรมาอติรพามตากเตกตอกิที่เราขบุมีกีตากเตตอกิลิลาทุตนุมีกีตากเตกตอกิตาเชตาลามีกีแล้วก็บาดูทอกีก็ได้เวตัวนู้เชลาโจมีกีจะตัดสิตาบาเลตาเชตาลาฟิฟัมเขาคนนี้ช่วงสุดท้ายฟิฟัมนี่ผมมากุดก็เล็ดที่อันนี้คันเล่ว่าอยู่ถูกกี่บ่อนอสรุปมอเป็นไรเด้ถูกกี่บ่อนอสรุปมอเล่ตากอเลียนอันนี้คันลีจูไอ้พ่อมบ่จูเล่นี่ก็ชอบเธอเลยนี่ที่ปูเด้เราไม่พ่อยว่าก็พร้อมเลย
ก็เลยพาสมู
อ๋อเล่นตะคุดสัญญาปูนี่นมาดีเลย
มาก่อนนี้ก็โทรได้ปีอยู่
โทรดีเหรอ
พ่อหลักบลี
อ๋อเดินนักเว้ยเข้าไม่ดีเนี่ยพ่อพ่อตะมวยเนี่ยโอ้พึ่งเลย
พ่อตะมวยเนี่ยเวลาปรีเรือโดดกลี
อ๋อไม่ใช่แต่ฮาวาโกดีเหรอ
อัปลี
อ่ะอ๋อปาทุลีโพหอมคนนี้ก็บอกว่าแล้วปาทุลีโพก็แบบเปล่าหรอ
so mu mi lo ko khuna ra la tu su ta ge do hi lo asa la ko lo ta ma ta khu ko ra atara ta kle le ta ma le thop pa thaki ke nyo thu li ta munin ta lo le ta ma ta khu mi to ko kha ni sa ta ba thlo ta mi kho do li la thu tu nu do ra sa la ki go pa no aki ele ata osi okla o ni lo
เนี่ยเดี๋ยวเราแล้วตัวเว็บวัตถุลิโพสิพาวก็ดื้อโคโลตามุตะกีเบตละมาเลมาเป็นนี่ประจำมุนิตาล้อดาบเตติล้อตอมากีเราจะไปลุลาทุกนุตาเชตาลาดอกตะเปคากิโฮคุกปีดอกเตดอกฉับผู้ผู้มีตามาคาเลประมาตีออดอกมาเลถอเปถอดีกระตาเป็นเลยล้อม
แพลาออกโทบกิกทรซินนุเนียตอปุนีซอโมคือดอกกะญอวัตถุลิโพดอกคนนาละโคโลตามตะคือกระติดพาโดนิตาควดายาละเกลมาโลนาเปอาทอตาบัดเทดอกวัตถุลิโพดอลกัวปัตวอตาดอตะดกคือกะยาโมปาพิเพื่อฮอกโกกปิตาลอตาเกลอาซีซีเอแล้วก็ฟิลิปปินส์ลอ
วัตถุดิบเนี่ยมาจากไหนพี่ยอดยา
ย้อนมาเลยแกเอา
เด้ Dia ya lah.
Đó đi vào qua vào rất là mưa ta và tôi đi cô tôi bằng bao nhiêu tôi bà nấu bà tại coi nó còn tôi đi cô ta bị nó bà nó tập làm ăn ta bị người ta tăng lúc vào đó bắt đầu hết deploy mình vào đây đó bây giờ hết rồi mình đó bắt đầu cô đó logo và bóng bắt đầu thì sao nó cái là và logo phụ vào rồi phải cái sao họ cái mình vậy đồ mình vậy là
I think women will be this dominant.
Can you teach them how to?
Ama kubia ye, kubia.
Kubia. Kita buat saya.
Itu bos ya.
Picture po kayo tatlo. Sherman, picture kayo tatlo.
Awak je cuma le betah hutan ke betah mai ni, demi thep awak pakai tu liau kau ba, demi thep awak patut lipu kau ba. Demi ke kau le hok kodop le ni, tambah tuai lo dah le di tak kesi, tak cakap le ke ni tak juta balo bahasa aku ni pertama awak ni ke bablu si kau dah, hok kodop le ata tuta so, pertama le maka awak capu kau ba, perkulap lo tiba, pertama cakap dah le kau ba, aku ni ke kep lu kep si kau dah, hok kodop le macam ni. Tôi qua cái lỡ tàu ta apu quỳ đó, rất nhiều tàu khay đó, tôi mới thấy lỡ quỳ thò, phá được nha, để bật lo, và nuôi khô lên này, quỳ thò lỡ đi lên này, bật phiêu mà anh mà ta clor rồi chết, đó, ở bên mà cái bự là thu tu na cái này, xí nhau rồi chết, đó, bộ chỗ na cái này mà ta lo bà rồi chết, này lỡ cái tàu phiêu lắm mà, mình lỡ cái tàu gì à, có này bộ qua cái này, ta bảo vô này, gái lỡ bộ cái này đồ rồi ha. Kui ba mini khole ni awe khai ni phoro ka kle khoi tho ta o ke te to ke alo kle ko pho ti phani gi don ti alo lip lo ji
Deni e ki thor si kho lama sha to pu ni byo si ti pha thoda ko dor be tap tu ta kha NCA do bo tho kle la at le kui ta pa pno alo kho ta de ke tho do gnyo dog lu ta thu plet tu mun do kam la ki tho ble bà kết thúc qua lo ô cũng muốn đi lo. Sau muốn đó lo cô qua cầm là qua lo ô cũng muốn chụp phá bà phụ trò ta đó khi từ quý nhà ta suốt ta chỉ ta trò cái sa lỡ ở bên kia ô số bài kia lỡ ở bên kia đu tàu lỡ ta mới ta khử bùn đi lo.
Theo đó ấyเป็นnhà bà lỡ Pepu we, pepu beti te edo la ta su te thok le mukle bo ba ko. Di nia so bo pa pasar phlo ko la ta demi ko pu patalo ba di kle mu ba. Bo tho da ko du do bo tro che du la sar phlo ko la pata te me gi pata paso pata me gi apu ni lo no. Su bo do atare ta kle ta we ni te me ta la aku phi ba me ta kha la pate le kho li la no cái lệ là cái bữa aku ni, bây giờ lo phố bà có bà khép phố xịt phải ni, bố mi khi mi bị xịt bà, aku ni bà cho mày cho na, nó. Chỉ mới bà hiểu gì ta tụi lớp qua cái gì là cái, bà mình có ta lo tập qua cái lớp qua cái bố lo cái lớp mà sẽ có ni lo nó, thì mình lớp mà lớp cái chạp đó, bố khu pela bố lạc lệ bà, lớp ta cái lo vậy ni bà tu bà ta xịt ta cái tu mi cái bà tu le bagi baba dah hilata kepegawan ni osiko dah dua ratus cumi china le juga hibu dah cuma di juga kloni cuma ti baca kala nani yani odi citinya aku ni dah pugulu gelo osiko le pagulu tatu flag agolo tadu kle ni citinya de mela othe bi dah cu dah pakha ba tadu kle ni osiko dah bubu nale nalo yale jelo cuma marah ni pakai pak foto ko ni kemita kita ba foto kan ni lo no Sudah me pemarga dah pemnani lah betul, pukul vitamin juga, ya dokter ini.
job lo to dile me jor ko me ta me ta na me dre me ma ka me te ko che wa ma chi ai ru me ko da bo chwa ke ta ko to dile por ka mu kile kil hale te kle mile te kle bo ta ti ki wi gla che dre che ma ka che ta che ta li che te ko che wa na che te ko por ka bị lo tao bị mẹ ta na mẹ thì chơi vào na chơi cái mẹ mà khá mẹ phụ đi lên chơi cái mình cái bông lên đi lo bông lo ta thì đi thiếu cái là mình sao bà ta cũng khi lên mình na bà ta mi chơi đấy chơi mà khá chơi tao chơi ta lấy chơi tôi chơi vào na chơi cũng mà còn đâu bao nhiêu le ji po ko po ta tu ba ko ba ri kho myo le bi jo si bi do it pu he tho mai ma na bra te ba le sa ko bo ro kle we ri bi tu lo ra ba ko te le ki ki te ni kha ti wa je wa ni de mi pa le a tho di tho da da no mi ma mi na pa ro pho pa tu li pho lo le wu lo ke lo le kum le a kho sa lo le di so po mi ti po ko po ko mi o ki ba lo le ki ni ya we na we de kha le kho myo ke ni pa ma se le wi phi sa pha bây giờ nên mình chỉ sang đây thì mình được khá giả bà nào ấy đi ni ở là gì ni lúc khi ni bây giờ suy ni chỉ về ni khá tí về loแต่ข้าเลือกแค่นี้อยู่ในสิ่งนี้เลือกว่าคู่เรือคนที่ขบวนนี้จะพลาดเลยนอดกูว่าจะซาดมีว่าจะซาดมีว่าก็มีเอาไว้แก้หิโคข้อโคปกติมาเกี่ยมาว่าเกี่ยวก็ปกติหูดอกเกี่ยวโอเดปมุลิปาลาไปตากเตกโตเกี่ยวเนี่ยป้าบ้ามาก็ลาลุลาดิโซพวกมุลิปาลาไปตากเตกเกลมเป็ดโดนเลือกกับบ้าให้พิจารณากับบ้าเต้นนี่ว่าล้อที่เราจะเป็นมิตรที่แกปูเกเราเนี่ยพวกที่นี่แกขุดวิคนละเกอัตตาเดมิมีอาจุกมีขอกเมียขุดสู้เกคนละเกแม่เกตาเกพวกมาเกมาว่าเกอ๋อดิโซจะสมิสามีกูเลยกว่าเลยจะพูดจีรีนี่จะก็บากว่าช่วยแกนี่จะพูดนี่แค่หัวนุ่ยนะอาปมิเสกอาปพัลลุนะแกเราตะก็ตะแค่พาดูเลยจะหัวนี่โซล่าปาตาปามน้องปกโมูเกดิโซเอาไว้เสียตาอาปาตาปามน้องดิแกเราตะก็ตะแค่พาดูไม่บากว่าที่ปานี่แกเราตะเราวิลต่อพาดูเลยจะก็บากว่าพวกแค่จะพูดจีรีนี่จะก็บาอีช่วยกว่าช่วยแกอ๋อปมีโคจิลงตะก็ตะแค่เลยปกบาเลยครอบตัวดิdan naru le apu ni de we sama ma ko ta di le ki le la sami si ba ti ni sa po sa li ni suru sara la le samu sar ko la o ti ba ni chho ni ko sa le sa po sa li le chu le ko de sa po sa li ni mi pa la lu lo na loเดี๋ยวดูกันนะแค่เราบ้าไปอะไรเนี่ยสาวนี่เลือกคิดเดี๋ยวนี้สามีสาวผู้ชายเลือกคิดเลยล่ะนี่ก็พาบ้าสามีก็รอบ้าก็เลยสิดีสาปูเจโดดมีแล้วเลยก็บ้ากินเราวิเวเดี๋ยวพวกมีโอคิวบ้าเดี๋ยวพวกมีบ้าโอบ้ากินอะไรล่ะหลอกเลยอาปาร์กาซิเตลีเพื่อนบ่าวเกล้าหลอกเลยอาหลอกขี้บาชานะกินี่เพื่อนมีโอคือบาเกเดพอเดลีเดปิดเอาไว้เดมุนเดรุโกนี่
must be the price of freedom. Our people here have for a long time been prepared for this eventuality, and I am confident of their readiness. I think that when it does come, that the people on the other side would be surprised as to what they're going to get. And I'm confident that it will not last long.
When General Chukwuemeka Ojukwu declared Biafra's independence in May 1967, not many could have predicted the level of carnage and devastation that would befall the people of southeastern Nigeria over the course of the next 3 years. Having concluded that their people were no longer safe anywhere within the borders of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, the political leaders of the Igbo ethnic group decided that the only way to save their people from ethnic persecution was to break away and form their own country. Buried deep underneath the Biafran soil was one of Africa's largest reserves of crude oil. And emboldened by the seemingly infinite money-making potential of this precious black toxin, Biafra's new leaders charged forward in full confidence that the very ground they walked on was their golden ticket to becoming a true African powerhouse. But just as they fueled the Biafran fight for independence, the region's vast deposits of black gold also reinforced the Nigerian government's resolve to extinguish the Biafran uprising by any means necessary. With the newly independent state attempting to take away an estimated 67% of Nigeria's oil reserves, the stage had been set for what would ultimately go down as the most violent conflict in West African history. For 3 grueling years, the Nigerian and Biafran armies would engage in a raging battle for dominance, in which an estimated 2 million civilians would lose their lives due to starvation and disease. But as with virtually all modern conflicts, the battle would be much more than just a violent exchange of bullets and explosives. The Nigerian Civil War would see both belligerents engage in wartime propaganda with a level of sophistication never before seen on African soil. According to the Nigerians, the Biafran state was nothing more than a rogue insurgency sponsored by nefarious foreign powers seeking to destabilize and disintegrate a promising African country. The Biafran narrative, on the other hand, invoked a much more visceral reaction. Their message to the international community was that the Nigerian state had adopted a policy of ethnic cleansing against the Igbo people, and so Biafran independence was the only way to protect themselves from complete annihilation by a Nigerian state whose only interest was in the exploitation of Biafra's precious oil reserves. But if the general rule is that history is written by the victors, then the Nigerian Civil War might just be the exception. Although the war ultimately ended with a victory for the Nigerian army, the Biafran wartime message would have a long-lasting impact on how Nigeria's oil wealth would come to be viewed in the years following the war. You see, one of the interesting paradoxes of the Biafran struggle was that in breaking away from Nigeria, the Igbo leaders also took with them a significant number of minority ethnic groups which were also native to southeastern Nigeria. And although many international observers ultimately came to associate Nigeria's oil with the Igbo struggle for independence, the true heirs of Nigeria's oil wealth in the strictest sense were the various minority ethnic groups of Nigeria's Niger Delta region. When added together, these groups amounted to as high as an estimated 40% of the wartime Biafran population, and although many of them would remain relatively unknown both during and after the war, they would arguably be the worst affected victims of the never-ending struggle for Nigeria's oil. One of such minority groups were the Ogonis, a poor but proud people who, despite occupying a territory smaller than the size of Hong Kong, boasted of one of the deepest and most sought-after crude oil deposits in the entire world. Representing less than 1% of Nigeria's population, the Ogonis could perhaps be best described as a micro-minority ethnic group. According to folklore, the Ogonis trace their lineage all the way back to the ancient Ghana Empire located in modern-day Mali, and according to linguistic studies, the Ogonis are likely to have been one of the earliest settlers in the region. As with most Nigerian ethnic minorities, the end of the Civil War in 1970 hardly changed their fortunes. In fact, post-war Nigeria would be not so much divided by ethnicity as it was divided by the haves and the have-nots. With various military dictators taking turns at the helm of power and oil prices flying sky high, Nigeria in the 70s, 80s and 90s became a perfect illustration of what political scientists referred to as a rentier state. A country which was solely dependent on bribes, rents and taxes paid by foreign businesses in exchange for raw natural resources. With the oil money in full flow, Nigeria's leaders really didn't need the economy as a whole to perform in order to fill their pockets. And even better, neither did they need to rely on the approval of an electorate. Aside from a very brief period of democracy under President Shehu Shagari between 1979 and 1983, Nigeria would remain under the firm grip of a host of military dictators. And so from the end of the Civil War right up until the creation of the Fourth Nigerian Republic in May 1999, the post-war Nigerian state basically had no civil contract with the Nigerian people. The only relationship that mattered to Nigeria's leaders were the numerous opaque agreements with the multinational oil companies operating within the country's oil sector. And of all the casualties of the unholy post-war alliance between the Nigerian military state and big oil, the Ogoni people were undoubtedly amongst the worst hit. With the full blessing of the Nigerian government, the Royal Dutch Shell Oil Company was authorized to explore and extract oil from Ogoni land. While this was a win-win deal for Nigeria's military generals and the oil giant, Shell's entry into the region quickly became nothing short of a living nightmare for the Ogoni people. In a strongly worded letter sent to Shell's headquarters in the city of Port Harcourt just 3 months after the end of the Civil War, a group of Ogoni leaders and representatives raised concerns about the serious damage being done to their land by Shell. According to the letter, the Ogoni roadways had begun collapsing under the sheer weight of Shell's machinery, and the fishing and farming industries, which had been part and parcel of the Ogoni way of life for centuries, were now under significant threat from oil spills in their farmlands and rivers. Responding to the allegations levied against them, Shell swiftly dismissed the Ogoni's claims as nothing more than a dishonest attempt to blackmail them into paying money to the Ogoni leadership and forcing Shell to build free local infrastructure. But just 2 weeks after Shell sent this response, a catastrophic incident would occur in the heart of Ogoni land. On the 19th of July 1970, an oil wellhead exploded, hurling fire and hot oil into the Ogoni skies. Within the space of a few days, the Ogoni's main sources of drinking water had been completely poisoned. Farmers began staying away from their own farms for fear of igniting fires, and those who were brave enough to return found themselves waddling around in crude oil. For 3 long weeks, the oil spill continued unabated, contaminating everything it came into contact with, from the Ogoni's air to their land, and most importantly, their waterways. And unfortunately, the July 1970 oil spill would just be one amongst a long list of similarly devastating incidents that would occur over the course of the next 3 decades. In fact, by the end of the 1990s, the total amount of crude oil spilled in Ogoniland would reportedly reach as high as a combined total of 2.5 million barrels. Monitoring the oil spills from his offices in the city of Port Harcourt was the renowned Ogoni writer and film producer, Ken Saro-Wiwa. After a short career in government, Saro-Wiwa had risen to become arguably the most well-known Ogoni in all of Nigeria, thanks to the success of his hit comedy show, Bassey and Company. Centered around the life and trials of a small-time conman and his various get-rich-quick schemes, the popularity of Saro-Wiwa's comedy show was largely due to his light-hearted critique of the get-rich-quick mindset that had become prevalent at every level of Nigerian society.
It's all roses, so it seems, let me tell you what to do. You want to be a millionaire, behave like a millionaire, act like a millionaire, millions will be yours. You want to be a millionaire, think like a millionaire, act like a millionaire, and the millions will be yours.
Mr. B, I'm hungry.
I thought you stumbled across a street party last night.
Yes,
Didn't you eat enough?
I did. That was 12 hours ago. I'm hungry again.
Having grown sick and tired of the military government's complicity in the devastation of his ancestral land, Saro-Wiwa spearheaded the creation of a pressure group known as the Movement for the Survival of the Ogoni People, which was popularly known as MOSOP. With the approval of the elders and traditional rulers of the Ogoni communities, Ken Saro-Wiwa drew up a Bill of Rights mandating greater financial and political autonomy for the Ogoni people. He then sent his Bill of Rights to the military government alongside an urgent demand for protection against Shell's devastation of their land and property. But with Saro-Wiwa's MOSOP group having virtually no bargaining power, the Nigerian government's response was to simply brush them aside and carry on with business as usual. Deciding that more drastic measures were needed, Saro-Wiwa organized a mass protest on the 3rd of January 1993, in which he mobilized an estimated 1/3 of the entire Ogoni population to come out in peaceful protest against Shell's exploitation and the Nigerian government's betrayal of Ogoni land.
We are going to demand our rights peacefully, non-violently, and we shall win.
Although the January 1993 protests succeeded in raising international awareness about the plight of the Ogoni people, the demonstrations would have no immediate impact on Shell's operations. In the weeks following the protest, Shell continued to expand its operations in Ogoni land as it bought up more concessions, dug through farmlands, and devastated more Ogoni communities with the full blessing and protection of the Nigerian military. Taking matters into their own hands, Saro-Wiwa's MOSOP quickly adopted a more radical approach by rallying the Ogoni youth to sabotage Shell's infrastructure and intimidate their workers. And within a short period of time, Saro-Wiwa's MOSOP had succeeded in forcing Shell to pause its operations in Ogoni land. But with a significant chunk of the Nigerian military government's income stream now at risk due to MOSOP's activities in Ogoni land, Ken Saro-Wiwa quickly went from being a small irritation to the single biggest internal threat to the Nigerian state. Moving swiftly and decisively, the military government led by General Ibrahim Babangida hastily announced its infamous Decree No. 29, which mandated a death penalty for anyone uttering words, flying a flag, or publishing material that was capable of causing violence or encouraging ethnic nationalism. The Babangida regime also reportedly deployed a special task force into Ogoniland to carry out undercover operations aimed at manufacturing fake tribal wars and using them as an excuse for the summary execution of MOSOP members. These covert military operations would allegedly continue up until November 1993, when General Sani Abacha replaced General Ibrahim Babangida as Nigeria's military head of state. Under Abacha's rule, the Nigerian military government switched to more drastic measures as it immediately deployed 400 military officers into Ogoniland with direct instructions to attend MOSOP demonstrations and open fire on activists whenever possible. But even with the increasing number of casualties under Abacha's rule, Sarawiwa continued to encourage resistance and inspire more and more Ogoni youth to join his movement. But unfortunately, his fervent desire to continue in the fight, despite the shoot-to-kill policy adopted by the Nigerian government, would ultimately lead to a division within the MOSOP leadership. With the increasing amount of Ogoni youth losing their lives in the fight against the Nigerian military government, some Ogoni elders denounced Sarawiwa as being too militant and began calling for MOSOP to seek to engage in peaceful negotiations with the Abacha regime. Taking full advantage of the Ogoni's internal squabble, the Abacha regime would allegedly orchestrate one of the most cold-blooded conspiracies in Nigerian history. On the 21st of May 1994, 4 Ogoni chiefs were seized during a meeting of elders and brutally murdered by a mob of angry youth. Although Sarawiwa was not actually in Ogoni land on the day of the murders, he was arrested on suspicion of having orchestrated the killings, as all 4 of the deceased chiefs were public critics of Sarawiwa's activism. Despite completely denying all charges, he was imprisoned for over a year before he was eventually brought to face trial in front of a special tribunal. With the panel of judges suspected to have been handpicked by General Sani Abacha himself, and many of the prosecution's witnesses later admitting to having been bribed to give false testimony, Sarawiwa was brought to face trial in front of a textbook kangaroo court. As one of the most well-known political prisoners of the infamous Abacha regime, Sarawiwa's trial garnered a great deal of international coverage. But despite the global outcry against the unfairness of his arrest and trial, Ken Sarawiwa was ultimately found guilty and sentenced to death alongside 8 other leading members of his movement. The Ogoni 9, as they would forever be known, were executed by the Abacha regime on the 10th of November 1995. After surviving 4 unsuccessful attempts by the executioner, Sarawiwa finally succumbed to death by hanging, and his immortal last words were recorded as, "Lord, take my soul, but the struggle continues." The execution of the Ogoni 9 provoked strong international condemnation of the Abacha regime by the United Nations, and arms embargoes were imposed on Nigeria by the European Union and the United States. British Prime Minister John Major called the executions a judicial murder, while South Africa's Nelson Mandela, Zimbabwe's Robert Mugabe, and Daniel Arap Moi of Kenya all called for Nigeria's suspension from the Commonwealth of Nations. But after all was said and done, the international outcry and sanctions eventually subsided, and the Abacha regime quickly returned to business as usual. With the Sarawiwa threat neutralized, oil production gradually returned to relative stability, and thanks to its control of Nigeria's free-flowing oil revenue, the Abacha regime would ultimately go on to become perhaps the most prolific kleptocratic Nigerian regime of all time. In fact, Abacha's government will be so successful at looting that even over 2 decades since his death in 1998, no one knows exactly how much money was stolen during his time as Nigeria's military head of state. The Ken Saro-Wiwa story is undoubtedly one of the saddest tragedies in Nigerian history. But while his life may have been brutally cut short, his immortal last words will forever continue to resonate in the hearts and minds of the ever-growing number of Nigerian youth that choose to continue in the seemingly never-ending struggle against the Nigerian establishment and its treacherous alliance with Big Oil. Once again, it's KB Taiwo for New Africa. If you've enjoyed this video and would like to see more content like this, then please like and share this video, and also consider supporting us on Patreon at www.patreon.com/newafrica. Thanks again for all your support, and until next time.